I got sidetracked myself. The labor market in Japan, a lot of working class women are in small-scale industry. And there is, a lot of women in the labor-intensive and textile and appliance, particularly at the lower end of the production chain. Whereas you do have women who do have education, if they can stay there, but there's all kinds of discrimination in management, but it's a very small percentage. Or in publishing, there's some interesting work being done by Japanese feminist sociologists. And if you're interested, there's one that looks at a comparison of the publishing industry, electronics industry, and the financial industry in women's opportunity within management within those three. And that's a really interesting case study. I'll have to give you her name. In fact, she's from the university that was hard hit. Hoku, yeah. But if you email me,
she's coming tomorrow.
Okay, still email me because I'll have to. I'm not the age I don't remember anything. I have to look at the Meishi and say, "Oh, right, I don't remember anything."
So, women are expected to go out at night and drink with men or with other women?
No, well, if you work with,
I thought this was like a sort of a segregated.
I mean, because it is segregated,
yeah.
So you're usually going to be with other women and men. But if you are in the management, you should be, If you don't, I mean, you should. If you don't, then it means your promotional opportunities are going to be not so great. So,
but it still doesn't. My first work that I did was working in a hostess club, where this is exactly what I worked on, is have these men go out drinking, and hostess clubs are pretty high levels, so you're supposed to go drinking, and so you could go to much lower levels if you were working class, but if you're the salaryman, you go to these hostess clubs. And I did this work in the early 80s, and working there 4 months, within the 4 months, twice women came in who were like this managerial level. And the hostesses treated them like they would the men. I mean, you're supposed to flatter people and make them feel like they're hotshots. And so that's what they did with the two women, but it doesn't quite work. It's a little bit. So the hostess was like, "Wow, you're looking great tonight. You wear that suit nicely, But it doesn't quite work the same.
So I think this is kind of dissonance, right?
Yeah,
but a lot of women don't want, and that's why if you have children, I mean, it's like impossible. You can't do that. It's just not. And in Tokyo, forget about it. I lived in one part of Tokyo, the northern part, and that was like 2 buses and a train to, where I needed to go for my interviews. It was, and that's not uncommon. No. You see people sleeping, and I was doing the same thing. And the great thing is, no one's going to steal any of your stuff. So you can sleep away. It's not like New York City or Detroit. No one's going to steal your bag. You're
really going to steal it even if you're awake.
I had a woman actually once fell asleep.
In New York, how dare you?
Fell asleep on my shoulder. Well, a woman felt like it was like a Saturday, and she must have been working a huge lunch. So she was sitting next to me, and she sort of her head slowly kind of went down.
But Japanese are usually very gracious about
that.
Yeah. For us, it's like.
Well, I didn't know what to say. I don't want to be
privacy
rude and wake her up.
Very defined. And there's a different sense of privacy in public in Japan. It's really interesting the way it gets negotiated, both architecturally as well as in terms of what we think are modesty. It's like no one's ever, whoa, I'm approved. Did you have a question?
Well, I did. It was a bit of an historical question. I was wondering why the law on agency temporary workers, why that appeared in 85. I guess I would assume it was the result of lobbying by the business community.
It was
pushing general deregulation at this time. It was very worried about Japan's strengthening currency and the effects of that on the economy. And I guess to follow up on that too, more recently, what are the views of the business community toward temporary workers, part-time workers? Because companies had to agree to try to preserve full-time, permanent, quote-unquote, permanent employment, at least for some workers.
Right.
what do they see as the ideal mix?
Well, what's happening now in terms of that preservation of the former core of the salaryman is what you're having is there's kind of a early retirement if you're working. So you end up in part, so a lot of men are becoming part-time workers toward the end of their career. So the company can save money, but you still have a job, but your income is going down. So it's kind of in lieu of actual retirement, you are staying on a job. So from 55 to about 65 is the time in which you have this going on. So it's not and that's why it's very much men and women. Men are experiencing it in a way that they never had before. Before it was, you get your job in that window, and it's April, and there's a lot of activity that happens, and there was an expectation, and certainly a practice that you would have that job for lifetime employment. Now, if you do get the job, you are going to be sort of transitioned into this kind of early retirement. So for workers, I guess that is positive in one sense. You have a job. On the other hand, it's a loss of income, and I think that's why you're seeing senior poverty is so high. I mean, that's unbelievably high. And so that's one of the things you can see, the erosion of that sort of institutional model. In terms of temporary employment, the 1980s, it was a way to sort of get more people into these temporary jobs, particularly in cities like Tokyo, where you have large corporations, multinational corporations. They need stenographers, they need translators, and these are highly skilled women. I mean, highly skilled women who have these amazing skills, but they have no security. And there's, once you're in that position, it's very hard to move out. So the business community wanted to have a kind of regulation. They would have liked it to be open to everything, so they can just hire temporary workers. But there's enough of the union presence that the unions were able to sort of slow it down. Deregulation happened. It happened also in the EU countries. It's happened in Germany, where it's a much stronger national trade union movement. So it is, and I know Guy Stanton has written, extensively on this to talk about that process of informalization. Because once you have a global economy, then standards are hard to maintain if it's not something that is done in concert. So deregulation is that move, but even in the EU case, we have to look at regulations sometimes also either have unintended consequences or in some cases have somewhat intended consequences, but not ones that are necessarily explicit. They're kind of implicit in this.
Hedi, in the old age poverty is like the people's welfare is tied so much to the corporation. So if you're outside, but if you're not in one of those career corporate jobs, I mean, is there no social security?
There is a pension, but it's very graded to the kind of jobs. So those who are in the corporate large corporations, they have a good pension. Others have a state pension, and it's meager. So there is a kind of what we call social security, but it's not what you need to live on. And the poverty, I think, also reflects the fact that the family structure has changed so much. And so again, the kind of reproduction that was part of these kind of compound families no longer exists. And women are, if they're in the job market, you can't do everything. I mean, that's what the hope was, have more babies, and there was a real Minister of Health, Labor and Welfare, when I was there in 2007, called women baby machines. It didn't last very long. He kind of was a faux pas, that women need to have more babies, they're baby machines, and they need to do this. So it was, kind of a Freudian slip. And so they're trying, they want it, all ways. They want women to, care for children, care for the elderly, the elderly population, and to work. Not so easy.
Didn't they have that? I don't know if they're still doing it, but for a while they were actually paying women to have babies. Like if you have kids, they were given like a subsidy.
Yeah, and they have it in Germany as well. It's in child allowance. I got one when I was in Germany.
Yeah.
It pays for your diapers, and it was good enough. So
they actually just right before the crisis. That was one of the things that they were doing, was they were negotiating to raise that. Yeah, and it's not actually just to have a baby; it's like monthly.
It's
allowance.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Like a Brazil baby, family thing.
I don't know what Brazil. What do you mean Brazil?
Well, they give families. They give money to the families.
Right. They give it.
Right.
That's
At a certain age,
right.
under a certain age, you get in Germany Erziehungsgeld, and that's just education geld, but it's just to socialize the
I
kids.
think one difference with Brazil, that could Pat, but like I think Brazil's a means tested family subsidy, but I think that Japan is like just a per head subsidy.
Right. And in Germany it was somewhat sort of means that's not really. I mean, because you had to have a really high income to not get it, but it was really again to encourage more women to have children and to stay home with their kids.
And the fact that Japan doesn't encourage immigration makes them probably.
I know. It's just like so.
You got to do one or the other.
I know, and that's what they're talking about, this labor shortage, because the fertility rate is it's one of the lowest in the world, and. And Germany's part of the EU, so they have migration coming from the former East, plus other from Ireland and so on. So there's a different situation. So their model can transform differently than the one in Japan. Japan, if somebody doesn't give, that's why I know people who are involved in the New Party, feminist labor organizers, and it's the jury's out, but it doesn't look good in terms of real changes. And I was perhaps something will happen, and with all these movements. I don't know.
Don't you? I think that part of the problem is that there's still this incredible. I mean, I don't even know if the word is ideological, but there's certainly kind of an effective attachment to exactly what you're talking about. I mean, the male breadwinner. Job for life, even though you're right, not that many workers ever have that. And the reproductive bargain, I mean, even though it's flawed, that's what people want. There was one study that came out of teenage girls, something like 85% of teenage girls want to be a housewife. Not because that somehow they imagine that that's going to be a happy, fun-filled, exciting life, but they think it's going to be secure. That they would have a husband who would have a salary that would be secure. So it seems that there's still that kind of longing to have that, which, as you said, it's not like all that many people ever had that, but it's just so
ideologically strong.
The divorce rates are up, right?
The divorce rates are up. But doing anything, I mean, no one is really going to have a baby outside of marriage.
Okay.
I mean, there's not this big single, well, I don't want the man, but I'll have the baby.
But single women there's a small number, and they work full time because there's no welfare benefits for mothers like you have in the U.S. It's all for wives, and it's more for wives. It's directed to benefit women who stay home with their children, but have another income. And without that, you really have to work full time. So 85% of single moms, it's a small percentage of single moms altogether, but work full time.
That's right. I was wondering, on the 85% want to, I didn't check out the ideology or culture or history, whatever it is, but I was wondering, if it wasn't so hard for women to get good jobs and
security is because if you're looking for security, you can't make it on your own because the assumption is you are, and if you look at the part-time workers, it's right. So the system creates this perversion. My whole point is the system. It's embedded in this kind of system. It creates this kind of as you say, inefficiencies, rigidities, and to these longings, the kind of nostalgia for something that doesn't exist or didn't exist in the same sort of way that you always sort of create in a nostalgic kind of backward look. But at the same time, there are. I mean, young men are really interesting to study, and so I'm thinking of maybe doing a mostly